Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond in London, England, as well as Paris, France, of course. You good old boys in Canada, we love you in Africa, the Big C tribe, but there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south. You're the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful March the 4th, 2021. Brown de Deportes, bonjour, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Charlton, we're doing well, and but we're a little concerned about the people out there in California. We didn't know whether to send a respirator or a life jacket out there for the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know if they're going to sink or swim. Once again, I want to thank our frontline healthcare workers, our nurses, doctors, and first responders. They're always ready with that respirator for those Lakers.
Well, they can use it. It's called being on vacation. It's all fair, love, and war. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, just tell them Big C sent you, as well as a fleet of Cadillac cars never stop arriving. Also, all around the world, say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing from 3,000 miles away. And I really do appreciate the way things are growing with Big C Sports. You can follow Big C Sports on Spotify. You can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast TV, Apple TV, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. But you better have a smart TV, or you'll be sitting there looking at a still picture. Man, pausing, Big C. Even the Lakers paused last night. They had everybody pausing. They kept everybody out waiting for the All-Star game, but we'll never pause on our Veterans Crisis Hotline. They really are experienced helping veterans and their loved ones get help, Big C. Why should everybody care?
Well, I guess those excuses are easy to come by in California, Charlton, but we have no excuses for this country not taking care of our great veterans in a way that they deserve, Charlton. We lose over 24 veterans a day to suicide in this country, Charlton, a horrific number. We give out the suicide prevention hotline number on each of our shows, Charlton, but we need this to become more of an American effort to find a way to stem the suicide amongst our great veterans in this country, Charlton. We should not be losing 24 veterans a day. They suffer through all the problems that everybody else suffers through in America, even more, Charlton. They come back from war and tours of duty, Charlton, with mental, physical, and financial problems, and that has led to a lot of the suicides. And we as a country need to find a way to halt that horrific disease amongst these veterans.
Big C, we will do our part. 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. If you're online, simply go to veteranscrisisline.net. That's veteranscrisisline.net, and you can get some help for our veterans and their loved ones. Really appreciate giving up that hotline. Also, very happy to be affiliated with Valley, home with weekly TV on Dish TV, Direct TV, AT&T Uverse, TV 53, home of the San Francisco Giants and the Say Hey Kid, as well as the home run king Barry Bonds. When you reach out to them, just tell them Big C sent you. Our goal is simple: recruit 10,000 real estate agents and brokers all over this great country, putting people back to work like McDonald's does it. Car dealerships do it, sports teams do it. Watch TV and real estate work for you. 800-772-8624. That's 800-772-8624. If you're looking for opportunities in real estate, go to bigcsports.pacwm.com. Most of our loans are underwritten by Rocket Mortgage, the #1 lender in the country on the wholesale side. Also want to say thank you to Xfinity, Comcast TV, and Comcast Spotlight for presenting Big C Sports to the universe. Just like God said, let there be light. Open your cell phones and just say it. Play Big C Sports Podcast. You will see all of our apps pop up, and I really do appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. Big C, I know it's supposed to be wintertime, and I've never, in my recollection, can recall a winter where it was like 80 degrees. I know Northern California is beautiful, but 80 degrees in winter, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, your buddy Donald Trump for 4 years said that we did not have global warming, Charlton, that everything was fine, that the scientists were not smarter than him, and he knew what was going on. Yet he left the world in a worse place, Charlton, since he's been out of office.
Yeah, it's hot in California, and it's freezing down in the Texas and southern parts of the country. Even the East Coast has had its inclement weather. But they are expecting some rain in Northern California on Friday, and then declare up again on Saturday. So Mother Nature's doing her thing no matter what it is in the sports universe. Really appreciate being a part of beautiful weather in Northern California. Big C, I want to touch a little bit on, as you know, we passed Black History Month, according to some people, but I love giving out Black History Day, Big C, Black sports and history in the universe, Big C. Every pro team, Jackie Robinson. We are inspired by the endeavors of these less celebrated competitors. I just wanted to bring up a couple of names, and I want to get your thoughts as people all around the world realize there's a lot of things that have been done, but not everybody gets to become a household name. February 19th, 1943, Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray Robinson defeats California's Jackie Wilson, Big C, at Madison Square Garden, the first of 91 consecutive unbeaten fights that continued until 1951. Big C, your thoughts?
And who's everybody think is the greatest fighter out there, Charlton? Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah.
When they celebrated, he got the 50 unbeaten streak. You think about someone like Sugar Ray Robinson, Charlton. These guys fought all the time, and they did not dust anybody in that era. But to have 91 consecutive fights, Charlton, where you go undefeated as a professional and not be recognized as the greatest fighter of all time. People want to talk about Rocky Marciano, and nobody can take anything away from the great Muhammad Ali.
Right.
But for people to ostracize Sugar Ray Robinson, and he was a world-renowned fighter, Charlton. He was the most popular figure in the United States in the ring.
Yeah, it's amazing what things you can learn when you follow Big C Sports. A 6-time world champion, Big C, once as a welterweight, fighting at 147 pounds, and then that's from 1946 to 1951, and then 5 times as a middleweight, fighting at 160 pounds between 1951 and 1960. Big C, the last time I was 147 pounds, I think I was 9 years old. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, it speaks to the greatness of the black athletes, Charlton, in the pre-media age. I mean, everybody now who turns on a television or has some type of internet device thinks that the guys that are on television now are the greatest that ever participated in an event. People look at MMA now and think that these are the greatest fighters ever.
Yeah.
But the legacy of a Sugar Ray Robinson, Charlton, what he accomplished, he even fought Muhammad Ali. Many people don't realize that he fought him in an exhibition fight.
Yeah.
But here's a guy that was an underweight fighter, Charlton, moved up through the weight classes and dominated every weight class that he was in.
Yeah.
And when you think about the impeccable record of 91 straight fights, Charlton, without a loss, I mean, you can't win that many fights in a schoolyard, let alone in a boxing ring.
Depending on what school you go to, Big C. If you fight 81 times in the schoolyard, I doubt if you're going to be in school much more than a day or two. But when you think about the dominance of this man, this is pre all the media hype where you could go home and watch different highlights for an hour a day. And he also did it in Jim Crow, okay? I think that's an added burden. Imagine if white Americans had to live with Jim Crow. And what if Tom Brady had to live with Jim Crow on his back? You think he would have 7 Super Bowl championships? I think not. But I want to go back to what Mr. Robinson did, Sugar Ray Robinson. He won 89 amateur fights without defeat, Big C. Think about that. Fighting first under his own name, and then as Ray Robinson using the amateur certificate of another boxer of that name in order to qualify for a bout. Again, he did this in Jim Crow, and for a lot of people, they understand what Jim Crow means. You had a lot of oppression going on that was outside of the ring, let alone dealing with the guy that was trying to take your head off inside of the ring. So think about this. He won Golden Gloves titles as a featherweight in 1939, Big C, and as a lightweight in 1940. He's considered by many authorities to have been the best fighter in the history of the universe. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, his record is impeccable and speaks for itself. You think about the courage of Sugar Ray Robinson also, Dalton. he was beating up white men in America at a time when they were lynching black men.
Yeah.
So not only was he out there fighting for his life in the ring, Dalton, but he had to worry about his life even more outside of the ring because his life was always in peril. Family members were in peril because he was beating up on white men in America and around the world, Dalton. And Americans didn't take kind to black dominance during those days, nor do they take kind to it in this modern era of 2021.
Yeah.
So when you think about the power and the influence, and we always want to recognize who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time when they talk about athletes that they've seen on television. Sugar Ray Robinson fought in front of a radio. That's how the world got to know him,
on
was
radio.
in front of a radio.
Yep.
You had to sit in front of that transistor.
Yep.
So you had to utilize your mind while you were listening to that boxing match. And here was a man that demonstrated excellence in and out of the ring, Charlton. And so when we talk about our great athletes and accomplishments of black men throughout American history, don't sit there and be buffooned by somebody that, somebody's told you about on television. Take the time to read about the greatness of the black exploits prior to the 1960s, Charlton.
Yeah, and I love the fact that Sugar Ray Robinson, he did it in Jim Crow. So when people talk about the GOAT, they're talking about GOATs that have $100 million contracts, guys that live in luxury upscale communities, and if they're white men, they never deal with racial segregation or racial prejudice or racial strife. They're just kind of given that role and never having to go through the same walking the mile in the same shoes as their African-American brethren. Robinson continued to fight until late 1965. He was 45 years old, Big C. Think about that. They talk about how great the GOAT is now, and I think Brady's 43, Tiger Woods is 45, but he was doing his thing. 45 years old. He fought until he was 45. And all of his fights happened in Jim Crow. In 201 professional bouts, he had 109 knockouts, Big C. Could you imagine knocking out half the people that stand up in front of you? He had 109 knockouts in 201 professional bouts. Big C, that's pretty impressive, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, that's beyond impressive, Charlton. You think about Sugar Ray Robinson. He had more knockouts in his professional career than anybody else won fights, Charlton. So you think about that. To have more knockouts than anybody else has won fights. I think, Floyd Mayweather is up to 50 or 51 in his unbeaten streak.
Yeah.
He does not have half the victories combined that Sugar Ray Robinson had in knockouts. No other heavyweight, not even Mike Tyson, as dynamic as he was in putting people to sleep in the ring. Muhammad Ali never got into that neighborhood, Charlton. But to think about 109 knockouts, that when he left the ring, he's telling other guys, hopefully you wake up. But this is how dominant of an individual he was. And as you elaborated on talking about the GOAT, I wish that people would spend more time talking about the greatness of previous black athletes before the sports shows and television became part of mainstream America. The accomplishments of those great men, Charlton, and women that allowed the athlete of today to flourish.
Very well said, Big C. And so, Big C, just, I think it's so important. I remember I got into sports because I was always listening to my parents and grandparents, spent a lot of time around them when I was a young boy, and they always had a radio on. It was either listening to the news to know what happened, or it was oftentimes listening to sports, and sometimes there was some R&B, that was playing, but for the most time, it was always on the news, like Walter Cronkite, or sometimes, especially when the fights came on, they listened to the fights. But when you think about how the great Sugar Ray Robinson, 201 bouts, Big C, 109 knockouts, suffered only 19 defeats, and most of those when he was past 40 years old, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you think about that, and if you add in those 89 bouts, Charlton, as an amateur, where he went undefeated in 89 bouts. This man fought 290 bouts as a boxer. 290. So when we talk about longevity and someone, just continuously fighting, but when you think about the time span that he fought in, Charlton, he fought to the age of 45.
Yeah.
And you put in 290 fights by the time that you're 45 years old. You're fighting frequently and often. I mean, you wake up and have breakfast, seems like there's a fight on the table for you. So he's the epitome of what a great athlete was, a great competitor was, Charlton, and a guy who did not have any quit in his system.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine when I spent a lot of time, when I was a young kid, I used to box, and then being around MMA fighters and seeing a lot of these guys, they got to get punched in the face a lot just to get their bodies used to being punched and not being hurt. And it seems like there's a lot of stuff going on in Northern California with sirens and blaring all over the place. Maybe people realize that POTUS caused an insurrection and they took too much to respond to it, but it's all fair level work, Big C. But I just want to touch on what Jackie Robinson did. You know, it's amazing because as I talked about my grandparents a lot, I learned about Jim Crow before I was watching CNN and Fox News and the local news, because I think what a lot of young black men back in the day, and especially now, what a lot of people don't talk about when they show highlights on whatever program, they never talked about how life had to go on outside of the sporting event. And then we'll call someone a goat who lived his whole life having that silver spoon in his mouth and never had to deal with adversity. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, think about if white society had elevated Sugar Ray Robinson the way that they did Jackie Robinson.
Yeah.
You know, here's a guy who beat up white men for a living, Charlton. Think about if society had elevated him and made him so noticeable, talking about breaking the color barrier. He broke the color barrier, Charlton.
Many
he was
times.
beating up white men. So that's breaking a color barrier.
Yeah.
And living in danger every day of his life. If you thought that Jackie Robinson went through vitriol while he was playing baseball, think about what Sugar Ray Robinson went through while he was beating up white men in the ring.
Yeah.
The words that he could hear blaring through the ropes, Charlton, of people being in the crowd, because I guarantee you, at least 95% of the crowd in any arena was white.
Yeah.
That black people were not going to get ringside seats or within hearing distance. And even those black people that were in the stands were in fear of their own safety, Charlton.
Yeah.
So here is a man going out making a living beating up white men in a time when there was total segregation in America. And you know, when you talk about the bravery and the actions of these individuals, this is what the history books does not want you to know. That black men could dominate you at that time and have the courage to still walk down the street and survive in this country. Those are the greatest accomplishments when you want to talk about greatness of an individual and a culture.
Yeah.
You know, Sugar Ray Robinson exemplified that.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that in today's day, and everybody has their own feelings about who's a GOAT or whatever. And I think in my time, it was mostly Larry Bird that people considered the GOAT as a white basketball player. As dominant as he was, he never had to do what Bill Russell went through. They played for the same organization when you think about it, the Boston Celtics. Even though Larry Bird still considered the prodigal son to Boston when it comes to the Celtics, the great Bill Russell has 11 NBA championships. 11. That to me is incredible. But what Larry Bird never had to deal with was when he got outside of Boston Garden and when he wanted to take his family or just himself or a date to a restaurant or a hotel or go dancing or just deciding what neighborhood he wants to live in. There's no way people can weigh, and maybe that's why Big C Sports are doing it. I want to get your feeling, and we don't know, what do you think it was like for Larry Bird to experience things that Russell, who has many more championships than Larry Bird ever experienced, had to deal with? Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you know, there's no commonality between the two individuals culturally, Charlton, in the city of Boston. This is the reason why when Bill Russell left Boston, he never went back, Charlton. Think about that. He never went back to a city where he won 11 professional championships. He didn't make it his home.
Yeah.
He could not wait to get back to the West Coast because the way he had been treated there in society. I'm not one of those individuals who gets caught up in this modern day GOAT talk.
Yeah.
Because all of these guys who play today on television, Charlton, are operating off the fumes of those great pioneers who paved the way for them to have an opportunity to make the money and get that they get, Charlton. Just because you have shoes named after you don't mean that you're the greatest of all time. You have to go back and look at the black athletes of the 30s, 40s in America and see what they operated under. Even in the 60s, Charlton, the threat of their lives being taken. Many black athletes lost their lives, Charlton, and it's not documented. Because of how they dominated white people during those days.
Yeah.
And so you think about those guys and what they had to go through. Think about Jack Johnson, world heavyweight champion for 7 years back in the early 1900s.
Yep.
This was a man that, and not only that, he had a white wife. They put him in prison for having a white wife because they couldn't beat him in the ring.
Yeah.
So they used misogyny laws, Charlton, to put the man in prison because he was so dominant and charismatic as a black man. So when you think about what black men have to fight through in sports, I'm not one of those guys who want to get into the conversation because you saw somebody win a game on television, has a few championships, Charlton. Think about the guys who sacrificed their lives and lost their families because they paved the way for those people to get to this point today to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Yeah, that's what I really appreciate the fact. Oftentimes, and everybody can do what they want. I remember growing up watching Bryant Gumbel on television he was in the news, and then he went into sports, and I guess he still does his specials. And Greg Gumbel, seen two African American men at the highest, maybe the crescendo of sports broadcasting, whether it comes to sports or news, Big C, and realizing what they went into. We just lost the late Irv Cross, that was a star football player. Big C played football, and then I think he was the first African American man to be given the chance to anchor sports news that he helped make famous. Big C, your thoughts?
And when you ask young people today, Charlton, they don't know who Irv Cross was. Irv Cross was an all-pro defensive back with the Philadelphia 76ers and the Rams. He was the first black analyst on sports television, Charlton, on the CBS morning, on the pregame show on CBS, along with Brent Musburger and Phyllis George. Phyllis George has passed away also. But Irv Cross and Brent Musburger went to college together at Northwestern.
Yeah.
So they had known each other since college.
Yep.
But when you see the guys on television, Charlton, and they're celebrated in ballyhooed, many of the young people who watch television today, Charlton, never knew who Irv Cross was.
Yeah.
A tremendous football player, a very intelligent man, Charlton. They look at the slick people on television with the great hairdos and the nice, suits that they're wearing, and thinking that they're the trailblazers of sports. No, they're not, Charlton.
Yeah.
Regardless of all the great sports black analysts that we have now, former players, Irv Cross laid the foundation for these men to be on television today, Charlton. He laid the foundation for us to be on radio.
Yeah.
Because prior to him, Charlton, you didn't have on a national stage anybody black that you could look up to when it came to sports. And he had no choice, Charlton, but to be the best. Because if he failed, none of us would have an opportunity today.
Yeah.
So you think about the courage, the courageousness, and intelligence of the black men who came before us, not because they went out there and scored a touchdown, Charlton, and had an interception.
Yeah.
This is a guy who had integrity on the air and was unflappable.
I think about guys, and again, people know different people. I've met a lot of people in media. I don't really get into people's personal lives. But I just want to expound on something, because you're a little bit older than I am by a couple of shades of gray hair. I understand if that makes sense to you. But when you think about some of the broadcast personalities now in sports, where there's a buck, where father and daddy, dad and son get into the same business, there are other men that have gotten their children into the same game. I mean, that's just that little nepotism that goes on in sports. But think about Irv Cross. He couldn't follow his father into the world of broadcast. Jane Kennedy, she couldn't follow her father or mother into the world of broadcast. And oftentimes, when we bring up things on Big C Sports, and people can Google it, the reason you don't hear much about those successes is because they were not mainstream names, but they were people that accomplished more than a lot of guys that they've allowed to become mainstream names. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I look at more today's broadcasters that don't pay homage to those great broadcasters that open the door for them of color, Charlton.
Yeah.
That's what I get slighted by more than anything else. To think that everything is ready-made. It's just like when they celebrate the black athletes on television now, and they talk about how great they are and how great a performance they had.
Yeah.
The reason why you chase records today in modern sports, Charlton, is because the guys that came before you set those records.
Yeah.
And that's what people lose sight of. Young athletes, young fans today lose sight of that. Wow, he's eventually going to break so-and-so's record. Well, hell, who in the hell was so-and-so? Because he was so great that it takes all these years to get to their record. We just celebrated Wilt's 100th game, the 69th anniversary of it, his 100-point game.
Yeah.
Nobody, 69 years later, has gotten close to Wilt's record. The closest is 81 points, I believe, by Kobe. And Wilt did not have a three-point shot when he did that.
Yeah.
When you think about Wilt averaging over 50 points a game, people celebrate an NBA player now averaging 32 points a game. He's the greatest scorer of all time. So when we think about this, and Wilt and Bill Russell, in the same season, both averaging over 20 rebounds a game. Think about that. Joel Embiid had 19 last night. They thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
We've had black men that have always done these things throughout time. They haven't gotten the recognition. People want to turn on a television, listen to somebody in a slick suit with a great hairdo, and let them tell you and lie to you that you're witnessing the greatest of all time.
Yeah, and a lot of our brethren, they'll have some insider that never even played a sport. So how'd he get in to talk to all the athletes? Sometimes there's a side of business that oftentimes black men talk about not being able to get an interview for a head coaching job or an interview for whatever position job in professional sports. But what people rarely talk about is the side of the media. A lot of the times when I started getting in media, Big C, back in 1998, it really started in college, where a lot of my classmates, they walked right into the door of broadcast with major companies and corporations and media, Big C. I was an A student in my major, Big C, but it didn't happen that way, and that's why I appreciate more of what Irv Cross did compared to what someone may call right now. They'll call Bob Costas in to get his thoughts on something about some great athlete. But what Bob Costas could share, I'm not saying he has to. Guys like Brent Musburger, Bob Costas, when they call them on and they want to talk about something, if it's a black athlete, they never talk about their white skin privilege, how they got into where they are. And that's something, I want to throw this to you real quick. When we talk about the inequality and how people are asking for a simple interview to compete for a job, I don't ever hear Bob Costas or guys like Brent Musburger or the Buck family. They never talk about how they got in the door. They didn't get in by the Rooney Rule, Big C, and we can say it's by skin color, but it's deeper than that. They got in because somebody pulled them inside, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you continuously pay homage to those people by mentioning who they are and how they got in, that's how they keep getting in. You're advertising for them. When you don't talk about something, people have a tendency to forget about it. Just like the former great black athletes of the past. When people don't talk about them, people tend to forget about them, and they only concentrate on the ones of modern time. But when you talk about the guys, even not name dropping, you're giving them prestige, you're giving them recognition, because people are going to go out and find out about them. You always say Google. So when you talk about these people, you're letting people know that they should elevate them. This is the reason why I like to talk about them, because I don't think that they're any better than us. They're just in a better broadcast position than us from time to time. So, if they're not recognized, then people don't listen to them.
Well, that's very well said. I have a different take on it, but I understand your point, and everybody has their own opinion on things. But
that's like saying, hey, you want to go down and watch a dog fight. Michael Vick went to jail over it. White people do it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But if you don't talk about the dog fight, nobody brings it up. But if you bring up the dog fight, what's the first thing people think about? Michael Vick.
Yeah.
They don't think about the white people that have done it for centuries in America.
Yeah.
Michael Vick's name comes up.
Yeah. Well, I still understand that too. I'm still looking for ways to open up doors for people of color to get into that side of the business. But it's all fair and love and war. There's more than one way to cook a potato. We're going to take what's called the Big C pause, also known as the Big C timeout. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about the world of sports and how things have or have not changed in the world of America. We'll be back. In the words of the great Arnold Schwarzenegger, we'll be back. All right, you can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. There's so many apps you can follow on, and I really do appreciate the way things have grown with Big C Sports. I want to say thank you to Xfinity Comcast TV and Comcast Spotlight for presenting Big C Sports to the universe. Just like God said, let there be light. Open your cell phones and say play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You will see all of our apps pop up, and I really do appreciate the way things have grown with Big C Sports. I know we're coming up on this big NBA All-Star game, Big C, and everybody's getting hyped for who's going to do what in the All-Star game. A lot of guys are taking the day off, or sometimes seem like taking the whole week off. Draymond Green and Steph Curry, they're not even traveling down to Phoenix tonight. LeBron James and a lot of other Lakers didn't even play last night up in Sacramento, but it's all fair and love and war. But I do want to I just want to throw this thought your way, because we talk about the GOAT all the time. We talked about Sugar Ray Robinson. In African-American life in America, Wednesday was 30 years to the day since the Los Angeles Police Department, they beat Rodney King, Big C, even though they were later exonerated by an all-white jury. But it happened during a traffic stop, and it set off protests that engulfed the city, and it really riveted the country, Big C. It feels at times like we are no closer to ending the police brutality because they have immunity, Big C, than at that time. It feels like we're no closer to ending it in racial inequality in America than we were then, even though we tend to fluff it over and say things are getting better, Big C. Your thoughts?
No, Charlton, it's no closer to ending. What did we just live in the summer here in America, Charlton, because of racial inequality and police abuse and police homicides in America, Charlton? And they did it this time in broad daylight. They didn't wait till the shelter of darkness when they beat Rodney King for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They choked George Floyd out and killed him in Minneapolis in broad daylight, Charlton, while he was handcuffed down on the ground. They said, we haven't gone far enough, so we're going to continue to go far and make the public judge us, is what they're saying, Charlton. They wanted to create a divide in America, and that's what they did. You think about how divisive America has been when white people will say, no, there's no injustice, there's no systemic racism in this country.
Yeah.
These people are just making it up. Regardless of how many times you see on television a black person being killed by police, and this is not about black-on-black crime, it's not about white-on-white crime, Charlton. This is about police brutality versus one culture. We witnessed it on January 6th in the nation's capital. When those white people were attacking the nation's capital, our lawmakers, our symbol of justice in America, they didn't get any police brutality, Charlton. They didn't get people fired upon by the police. They didn't take body bags to bring people out of there. But if that crowd had been black, I don't care what color you are, you know that they would have been shooting people right there on the steps and inside the Capitol if black people had done that. Think about the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington during the summer, when they fired tear gas and rubber bullets at black people that were protesting. They would not do it against these anarchists that attacked the Capitol. So we live in a racially divided country. I don't care how people say, well, now is not the time. Eventually we've got to be patient. No, you don't have to be patient. The only person that's going to say that is an oppressor. Oppressor will always tell you have to be patient, and now is not the time. When I get through whipping your butt and kicking you into the ground and I get tired, maybe we'll let you catch your breath.
Yeah, that is definitely something that everybody's had to deal with, people of color. Even that's what I wanted to open up with when we talked about, Robinson, Sugar Ray Robinson, how great a fighter he was, Big C. There's still, even I have it at times. Maybe, of course, not as much as he had it and the people back in the days of Jim Crow. But I still make sure that I watch where I am. I make sure that I let my children know to watch where you are. I know people are going to smile on your face. But the law enforcement aspect, I still want to make sure that men of color, I know he's not a friend of mine, but he's a retired law enforcement sheriff, 38 years in service. He's an African American. He was in Chicago and in many other major cities. And he was talking to me about, with the Council of Elders, just men sharing how to get through. And these stories you really don't hear much on mainstream programming unless it's a special, and usually during Black History Month. But every day I still make sure that I know my surroundings. I don't want to be preyed on by anybody, and I definitely don't want that for my children, Big C.
You think about this, Charlton. When Sugar Ray Robinson was fighting, at least the KKK wore white hoods around so you at least knew who they were.
Yeah.
Now they walk around with impunity, and they don't have to put on those hoods, Charlton, and they can do whatever damage they want in society and still walk and get the same impunity that they had wearing the hood.
Yeah, we know a lot of times law enforcement morphed into things that they came from more sinister backgrounds. It's all fair in Love War. They're finding that out as they investigate what happened on the Capitol. I want to throw this into athletics because Sugar Ray, how dominant he was. Bill Russell, they have the Russell Rule in the West Coast Conference. And before the conference starts, I'm going to Google how many African-American coaches they even have in the West Coast Conference that has the Russell Rule to make sure that minorities candidates get the same consideration for jobs that white guys get. I know they don't have it in the SEC and they don't have it in the ACC, Big C. But college athletics, there's a story that continues. Just last year, Iowa played Chris Doyle, one of his strength and conditioning coaches, $1.1 million. to leave the program after numerous African American players accused Doyle of racism that a lot of people say doesn't even exist in the United States, which is crazy. Penn State's men's basketball coach, Pat Chambers, Big C, meanwhile had to resign after using a comment about a noose with a black player. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, like I said, they operate with impunity. They say these things all the time. And people say, well, it's just locker room talk. No, this is the background that these coaches come from, Charlton. They come into these black kids' home, recruit them. I'm going to take care of him like he's my son. But once they get him off on campus, Charlton, they forget about him.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he's become dehumanized. You think about this. You are a college professor, and you're telling somebody you will put a noose around their neck. And you're only saying it to the black kids.
Yeah.
Chris Doyle, fired from Iowa, with all of those racial epithets that he used in attacking the black players on the team. And yet Urban Meyer turned right around and hired his butt down in Jacksonville. Talk about he vetted him. So Urban Meyer told the world that that's the type of person he was, because he talked to the man, and that kind of dialogue was okay. This is the reason why black coach candidates don't get jobs.
Yeah.
Because that dialogue is not okay with them, Charles.
Well, I just want to remind you that you told me about the reason you don't talk about guys like Costas or Buck or some of those guys who got into the business, how they got into it, white skin privilege. Not because they're excellent, they were just chosen from the inside. The same thing with Urban Meyer, Big C. It's okay to talk about things as long as it's real. I don't believe in shenanigans and making things up, but as long as it's real, it's fair. But I want to bring you also...
But if you can talk about the good side of somebody, you have to equally talk about the bad side of them. You just can't make them all smell like roses when we know that a rose every now and then will smell like dog boo-boo.
Well, my point is, though, it's okay to mention something as long as it's true. And when I think it's fair, unless we're just going to be dumbed down and, man, we're going to get on the air and talk about, man, did you see how high he could jump? Oh, I've never seen a guy jump that high. I'm not that dumb. I can't do that, Big C. So it's okay, in my opinion, to say somebody's name, because when they talk about how to make jobs and equality available, you got to sometimes go to the guy who found the ice cream store. Man, where'd you get that ice cream? How does it taste? I want to taste of that ice cream. If you don't mention the people who are already eating the ice cream, then how can you get there to you? It's okay being accurate, but I want to throw this to you. In January, the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, offensive line coach, he was fired after making racist and disparaging remarks on Twitter. Now, we talk about the Russell Rule for the West Coast Conference in San Francisco, and they have Gonzaga, UOP, and Loyola Marymount, Santa Clara, etc., St. Mary's. And it's about equity and fairness and even getting the interview. So my point is, I'm going to do a Google search on how many black coaches have gotten a job in the West Coast Conference coming up on March Madness.
Question on the Russell Rule.
Yeah.
When you have to implement a rule like that, what does it stand for?
What do you mean?
It means that you have not been hiring black coaches. And so you're trying to forcefully say that they have to be interviewed. This means that they have not even been getting interviewed. You have to understand the crux of the Russell Rule. That meant that black coaches have not even been getting an interview. And all it states is that they have to be amongst the finalists. It does not state you have to hire any black coaches. It's just like the Rooney Rule in the NFL. It's written under the same text, is that we want you to interview the guys and consider hiring them, because we have hiring inequities out here in the West Coast.
Yeah, but Big C, what you fail to do sometimes is you don't gotta, this is what I would suggest, and it's my opinion, but you gotta look at that guy in the mirror. You gotta have a solution. You just can't point the finger at somebody and say they're not doing something. If you don't have a solution, why would they listen to you? Does that make any sense, Big C? Your thoughts?
I do have a solution, Charlton, because when you don't hire a minority, it costs you. You lose a scholarship or two on the basketball team. In the NFL, you lose a #1 draft pick that year that you interviewed a black head coach potential candidate and you didn't hire him, then you lose your #1 draft pick. You have to, until white people lose something, Charlton, they will never succumb to pressure. Pressure means that there's a consequence for your action. And when there's not a consequence for your action, there's no pressure. And so they don't feel pressure. All that is words. Oh, we'll give you a $200,000 fine. What in the NFL on a team costs $200,000? Nothing, Charlton. You can't even get a player for $200,000. That's just like in professional sports. The name owner should be dropped from these teams. There should be board of governors. That's what it should be for all the teams. Because by having them labeled as owners, that means that they own all of that property. And that's why I keep saying it's akin to slavery, Charlton, because they are owners of black and white bodies also.
Yeah, but you got to educate yourself more if you call today's modern athlete a slave. It's not akin to it. It's nothing like it. It's like calling a bomb a cigarette, Big C. It's not the same. Nowhere near are they the same, Big C. But one more thing on the Russell rule, you can't have a college. I mean, they can lose scholarships if they don't. You can't force anyone to hire somebody, but they got to go through.
Why have the Russell rule then?
Well, that's a good point. That's why I'm saying the guys that are on the inside, ask them how they got their jobs. At some point in time, the people in the inside can open doors for you, but you can't just threaten to sue people if they don't open doors. It's going to push back. But on the Russell rule, I think it's a good deal. But again, I haven't done my own research to check on the West Coast Conference. I know Gonzaga is the marquee program, but I'm going to check on that. We'll talk about that before March Madness. But I got to get your thoughts on this because this guy did not need the Russell rule. In January, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, he was an offensive line coach, Big C. Now, he was fired after making racist and disparaging remarks and comments on Twitter. He wasn't hired because of the Russell rule. He wasn't hired because of the Rooney rule, and he was hired because of whatever reason that guys like Costas and Buck and Mushberger, they could probably talk about it. How do they get through the vetting process, even Urban Meyer with Doyle, when they can see this stuff, they put this on writing. It's not about hearsay and what somebody said. How do they get through based on that background, Big C, your thoughts?
Because they are white, they have a white friend that recommends them, and when you go to Urban Meyer, he's known Doyle over 20 years.
Yeah.
So he knew what type of individual he was. It eludes me the name of the coach that he had that beat the crap out of his wife while he was at Ohio State, and Urban Meyer got suspended 4 games by that, hiding that incident. And he also had the same guy down at the University of Florida. That's the good old boy network. You don't have to be relatives. You are friends.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of life that you are akin to. When you talk about Urban Meyer, he likes the guys who love to beat the crap out of women to be on his coaching staff, as well as being detrimental towards black kids.
Well, it doesn't keep him out of a job, and I'm sure the Jacksonville Jaguars know that as much as that statement, too.
So when everybody hires him and they know what he's been through and know what type of baggage he brings, that means that they're okay with that type of lifestyle, that acceptability. So let's be something about them that has a kinship with Urban Meyer.
Well, it didn't keep him from getting a job at Ohio State when he came from Florida. It didn't stop him from getting a job with Fox Sports when he left Ohio State for having some type of health issues. And it didn't stop Shad Khan, another man of color, from hiring him also, Big C. So I mean, people can do what they want to do. Even when it comes to the NFL, late Houston, Texas owner Bob McNair, he said the NFL could not have inmates running the prison. So was he calling his Houston franchise a prison, and that's why so many guys want to leave? Big C, your thoughts?
No, he was calling the black athletes a criminal because the black athlete during that time, Charlton, was when Colin Kaepernick took a knee. This is before McNair died, Charlton, and he said he did not want black athletes who he considered criminals having a say-so in the operation of the organization and how the organization should take a stance against racial and social injustice in America, Charlton. He's saying you guys are all criminals that I'm paying. This is why I said the word owner. They think about them as slaves. You're going to tell me the connotation that McNair made wasn't akin to that? He's calling all of his athletes criminals, that basically they should be locked up if they were not playing football for him?
Well, you know, he has his own way, or had his own way of expressing things. And I mean, that's what I'm saying. Mainstream America, they know the code words to get inside of an organization.
That wasn't a code word, Charlton.
Yeah.
That was straight up saying that his athletes were criminals. What's the code word about that? If I tell you you're black, what's the code word about that? If I tell you you're white, what's the code word about that? If I say that you're an inmate, that you're akin to being an inmate, you're one step away from being incarcerated, and the only reason you're not incarcerated right now is that you're under my employment, but I think about you as a criminal? What dog whistles there? That's a blatant statement.
Yeah, but Big C, I mean, if you've been around some time, you realize.
I've been around a whole lot, Charlton. I know what people say, and I don't try to replace the words that somebody says because of their color to cover for them. If you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're bad, you're bad. Bob McNair was a bad, racist individual as the owner of the Houston Texans, period. And his son is no different. You think about it. When his son was working there when McNair was alive, this was a guy that his dad gave him an office in the complex, Charlton. He didn't even have furniture in his office. All he had was a big screen where he would lay on the floor and play video games all day long. Players talked about that. When they would go in to meet with this guy, there he is on the floor. They didn't even have furniture to sit on.
Yeah.
This is a privileged damn kid that owns an NFL team now.
Yeah, I mean, we know that's existed since 1619. But be that as it may, we still got to find a way to succeed no matter what it is. And a lot of people are finding success, even swimming against the current. There's an author by the name of George Fraser. And everyone in the HBCUs, allegedly, they read this book, Big C. And it's called Success Runs in Our Race. And it's a popular book that's been passed around at HBCUs. And when I was talking about the late Irv Cross and guys like, Costas or whoever, Musburger, and people who got into the business, how they got in it, we know it's by friendship and nepotism and who you know. But George Fraser wrote this book, and it's called The Power of Networking to Create Greater Success. And against odds, there's so many people of color who've climbed the mountain in sports and in business, irrespective of things that have gone against them. And do you feel that black Americans, because it's one thing to stand on the outside and say racism, 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 okay, but what are you going to do about it? Do you think that black Americans as a whole network as much as maybe our counterparts do? Big C, your thoughts?
Charlton, I live in an area with nothing but black networking because I live in a black city. Well, when you think about prominence and getting ahead, does networking stop redlining, Charlton, in America? Does it help? Does it stop black people from getting redlined in America where they can't get a loan to buy a home, to buy a car, to get into certain universities? You can always get into an HBC. But when you want to get into an Ivy League school and you can't do that, or even some of the state universities, Charlton, because you're black. And why did they put in affirmative action, Charlton? You think blacks were not networking when affirmative action came along? Blacks have always networked since slavery, Charlton. That's all they had was to rely on each other. So they have networked throughout time. Blacks invented networking because they had no choice to do that but to survive. White people learned that from black people, Charlton. When you think about all the inventions in America and all the success that America has achieved, it was achieved through black networking and black work and black achievement. So we invented that phrase. We invented that term. We invented that ideology as a culture. So networking has always been there. It's just you're limited in the areas where you can network.
Well, I'm going to oppose what you're saying. And I think if you listen to what you're saying, you might even disagree with what you just said. Everybody networks. It doesn't matter who started it. It's the key to success in business. I want to take you to a man who's black and he's a billionaire. And he's overcome a lot of things. And people can say, oh, that's just the odds. Maybe he won the lottery, whatever it is. But it's an opinion called the 2-cent solution. You're never going to hear about this in any sports program outside of Big C Sports. They're going to talk about who can jump higher and run faster. But the 2-cent solution, and I want you to listen to it, Big C, to close the racial wealth gap, it's a call on United States companies to invest in black communities. By supporting black-owned businesses, corporations, banks will create jobs and boost the economy. Just hear me out for a second, because it's a solution more than saying racism, racism, racism. We know racism exists. Women know that sexism exists. It's referred to as the 2% solution, and this promise is championed by Vista Equity Partners founder Robert Smith. It's bold yet simple. He proposes that corporations, which reap the benefits of America's prosperity, take the lead in reversing centuries of structural economic racism by investing 2% of their net income over the next 10 years in black businesses and financial institutions. And I'll close with this, and I think it's a much better proposal than crying racism, racism, racism. The proposal is good not just for the direct beneficiaries, Big C, of the people who receive the money. We know they're going to benefit too. But think about this. It's good for corporations and the entire nation. Analysis by McKinsey and Company found that closing the racial gap went at between $1 to $1.5 trillion of economic activities over the next 10 years through job creations. And that's a black billionaire giving a solution, and he's not crying about racism. He's telling people how they'll make money by investing in black banks and black businesses, Big C. That's a different angle, Big C. Your thoughts?
He was putting that solution towards white America. Same thing that I do all the time, asking white America to be equitable to black America, Johnson. Just like I was saying about redlining. White America redlines. They don't let black Americans establish financial equity through property ownership, Johnson, even through business investment. He's talking about the same thing that I'm talking about, allowing blacks to get a loan, allowing blacks to get those educations. White corporate America prevents that, Charlton. That's the same thing that he was saying. The same words that I said. He may have worded it differently, but basically it's the same. It comes down to that. He's asking for white America to invest 2 cents in black America, and they would get racial equality, social equality. That's the one thing that white America is not in a hurry, Charlton, to achieve in this country. That's the thing you have to understand, that white America is not in a hurry to have equality in America. 400 years, they've never sought it out. And they're not in a hurry to lose that 9% of society that they have right now, because they are 59% of the American population. They are not seeking to become 49% of the American population.
And that's where you're wrong, because you got to listen to yourself sometime and don't just keep playing the same record. If you listen to Robert Smith and compare to what you just said, the evidence is clear in a study by minority depository institutions found that black-owned banks locate and lend in black communities significantly higher rates than whites lend in financial institutions in those communities. Likewise, Research Association for Enterprise Opportunity showed that while black and white wealth gap is about 13-1 in the disparity, it can shrink to about 3-1 if they were to do what he's proposed. Now, he's not going in and talking about suing people for not having the Rooney Rule. He's not talking about suing people for not having the Russell Rule. If you look at the paradigm shift, Big C, he's telling people how you can make more money by investing in black communities and businesses. And that's a different paradigm shift than saying racism, 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 Big C. Your thoughts?
I have never said sue anybody because of any rule. And Mr. Smith knows the same thing that I know. He lives in a black city just like I do, where when you walk around, it's 8.5 out of every person, 8.5 out of 10 people that you see look just like you, that they're black, Charlton. I live in a city where there's black investment. I live in a city where what you see in California, you see in the opposite in this city that I live in, because it's black. This is a black mecca that I live in, Charlton. We have banks here. We have businesses here. We have hotels. We have restaurants. We have car dealerships. We have all of those things in this city, Charlton. And so when you talk about those things, I live in a place where those things are accomplished. He's talking about other parts of America where it's not. You can't say that you can go out in your city and see 5 black-owned banks. I can do that in the city that I live in, Charlton. And so when I talk about management and empowerment, I live in a city where it's created for black people. You have to be in a place like this to understand that. He's talking to the masses. He's talking to a place like where you live to give blacks an opportunity. We've accomplished it down in these areas. And so white America's always known what he said, Charlton. He has benefited from both sides of the ledger. But white America is not dumbfounded to think that if they don't provide for black people, Charlton, that they can't make more money. They know that there's an opportunity to make more money from black people. It's just like when they had all those houses that they were selling in the early 2000s, giving those predator loans. They preyed a lot amongst minority people, Charlton, because they could get a double, triple sale out of a house. But when the legitimacy comes, Charlton, that to think that white people are not intelligent enough to know what they can make financially off the backs of blacks, but they also want to limit the opportunity for blacks to achieve more than what they have.
Well, that's a sweeping statement, but not everybody's against black Americans.
Tell me, I mean, we do a basic sports political mainstream show, okay? You tell me all the athletes that they cheer for, white, fans, they cheer for them. But do they invite that many white people, black people to their neighborhood? No, they don't. They'll cheer for you when you got a uniform on, when they feel that you're entertaining them. But when you're not entertaining them, Charlton, they're not as enamored with you.
Well, I still think your paradigm shift is different. Maybe you'll realize it eventually. But what he's proposing is to corporate America to create more income, and he told them how. And it's amazing that we got to build a racial and this wealth equity in America post-pandemic. This COVID-19 environment everyone's dealt with. He's also talking about the time for wealthy donors and corporations to focus on reparations more so than charity.
When did he write the book, Charlton? That's what I'm curious.
Well, it's not that he wrote a book on it. There's many books and many studies about it. But my proposal, and I'll finish it up with this, Big C. There's more than one way to cook a potato. But if you're going into an opportunity, we can't have this whole mindset that racism. Not everybody's racist. There are a lot of people, they want you to tell them how to succeed. We have this whole thing in the black community where a lot of times, whether it's Little Richard and Chuck Berry to Elvis Presley, or you look at the hip-hop generation, it's mostly purchased by white Americans, Big C, not as many black Americans. I think what the main thing is a conversation and a dialogue. We got to be willing to ask white America, how does it benefit you to open doors to us? And it can't be racism. It has to plead with making the money. And that's what Robert Smith is talking about. And I think if you pause, you'll see that you don't have the same mentality. You may be half of it, but you don't have the whole mentality. That's just my opinion, but everybody has to look themselves in the mirror. I got to touch on this before we close, and dialogue makes great. Part of what we're talking about is money and how to get access to the money. NFL football, they have a lot of money, Big C. As they're talking about the Rooney Rule, Robert Smith is talking about investment in banking, not a coach getting a job. There's a difference. Big Ben Roethlisberger, officially back with the Pittsburgh Steelers for the 2021 NFL season. The team announced Thursday, that's today, that he willingly, I don't know if it's willingly or not, but someone said, we're not going to give you what you wanted, that he's willing to pay $14 million from $19 million in this final year of his contract and spread the cash payment through 2022. And now the move lowers the team's salary cap by a hit more than $15 million. And with Big Ben's deal, the Steelers are close to cap complement for the start of the new league. I think it's March 17th. It's all got to come together. Although Roethlisberger's restructured contract reduces his cap hit, the team still faces a difficult task because they got to re-sign. They got like 19 unrestricted free agents, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, this is a team that's cash scrapped all the way around. The team was in a lose-lose situation regardless of how they look at it. Ben Roethlisberger, if he didn't restructure his deal, was going to be a $41 million cap hit against the Steelers this year. They were already in the red when it came to trying to sign players. Even with this move of restructuring his contract, Charlton, it's still not enough to get them with enough cap space to sign the free agents that they desperately need to re-sign.
Yeah.
I mean, Bud Dupree should be priority on their list. Juju Smith-Schuster also is another free agent, Charlton. These are two starters. They have 8 key starting free agents that were on their roster last year that will become unrestricted free agents.
Yep.
So the Steelers are in a tough mode right now. They're going to have to restructure several other contracts just to get enough cap space to sign players, and that's not even counting the draft.
Yeah, that's not. And so they're going to figure it out, Big C. It's all about figuring things out. Major League Baseball, they have a New York Yankees great, the late Lou Gehrig Day starting June 7th. This summer, I think that's a great gesture going forward for Major League Baseball. Just pay homage on a day for the great Lou Gehrig, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, here's a guy who has a disease, Charlton, that no one recovers from. Nobody has ever survived ALS.
Yeah.
And Lou Gehrig was the first American, actually, sports hero to come out and state that he had this horrific disease, Charlton, that nobody has ever survived from. So I think it's a great gesture by Major League Baseball. We celebrate the Jackie Robertson Day, Charlton, but when you think about Lou Gehrig, one of the greatest baseball players of all time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a great, sentiment from baseball.
Big C, I think it's a great sentiment. Seattle Seahawks, they released definitely wide receiver Josh Gordon officially, and then the retire tight end Greg Olsen, who says he's going to go into television. That goes back into the Irv Cross. I mean, most black men can't say after I finish playing sports, I'm going to go on the television. Somebody has to open that door for you, and it has to be talked about. Before we close out today's show, and I love the dialogue that we do in Big C Sports. You won't hear it anyplace else. I really think what Robin Smith is on to is something that's brilliant, Big C. NBA basketball, I've told you, I believe that the Philadelphia, they have what the doctor ordered, Big C. I believe the Philadelphia 76ers will be at least in the Eastern Conference Finals, most likely make the NBA Conference Finals between them and Brooklyn, and that's my opinion, Big C. Officiating, is it going to cost small market teams? The Utah Jazz, I felt they got had last night. It went into overtime. I know Joel Embiid was doing his thing, 19 rebounds. Of course, he scored a lot of points. But also, I felt the Jazz got robbed, and I guess they got robbed so much that even Donovan Mitchell talked about it. He'll get a fine, but also, he broke the script. You're not supposed to complain about what everybody knows is obvious, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there was some pathetic officiating last night. I mean, it was very evident that the home team got the calls. I mean, in the NBA, I mean, in all sports, Charlton, officials should never play a role in a game.
That's right.
But at least if you're going to play a role in a game, be consistent.
Yeah.
And when the obvious is happening in a game that allows the team to lose, Charlton, that becomes frustrating to a player because you go out there and you compete to win.
Yeah.
Players go out there to compete against each other, not have to compete against the opposing team as well as the officials.
Yeah.
Figuring you got a double faux pas going against you. And it was quite evident at times in the game last night with the Sixers and the Jazz that these things were going on.
Yeah, well, if you go across the country to Portland, Oregon, I love their jerseys. It just says Oregon for the state of Oregon as opposed to Portland Trailblazers. There was a play where Draymond Green got called for a charge against Damian Lillard. You know, it's a home cooking call. Could have gone either way. I thought it was a bad call, in my opinion, because he was still moving. He wasn't stationary. There was also a play where Steph Curry went in for a layup, and the ball spun around the rim, kind of like when you go to the carnival festivals and you try to win those big teddy bears and the ball just won't go to the hoop. Maybe someone turned on some type of electronic device. It didn't go to the hoop. And then Damian Lillard comes down after taking the charge and drops a 30-foot three-pointer, Big C. I thought that was some home cooking also, Big C. Your thoughts?
It happens throughout sports, Charlton. We see it more than what we should be. I mean, it's always been that gesture that the officials should swallow the whistle and be a spectator during the game.
Yeah.
Because when you think about some of the egregious non-calls and calls that occur in NBA games, I mean, they've gotten rid of the rule of traveling. And I don't know how they ever have the gall to call traveling on a player when I sit there and watch guys on a regular basis take 4 steps before they take a shot. And then you get somebody that's not a big-time name player, Charlton, in the league, even though he's an NBA player, and they'll call traveling on him. I watched the move where a guy got the ball outside the three-point arc.
Yeah.
He was fed the ball as he was coming down court. And by the time he got to the rim, I think he was at the bus stop, waiting on the bus to show up. But there was no whistle blown.
Yeah.
So when you look at these things, there was a move also by a player that he got a rebound on one side of the rim, and by the time he shot the ball, he had walked to the other side of the rim and got a foul on the defensive player in the process.
Yeah, well, the late Richard Pryor said, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? It's all fair and love and war. We love the game. It's not a perfect game, but it is a fantastic game. We're going to take the time to just tell all of our first responders, especially the people down in Texas, we hope that the governors will come to their senses, Big C, and please keep wearing your mask. It's all fair and love and war. Big C, just like driving a Porsche back in the day, there's a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, rumble, young man, rumble. With all you've got to lose, how can you lose? Rumble, young man, rumble. Big C, what are you looking forward to in this sports universe?
Well, I'm waiting on some of those West Coast basketball officials to wake up and start calling the games fairly, Charlton, in the NBA. But once again, I want to thank our frontline healthcare workers, our nurses, doctors, and first responders. They're always fair with everybody coast to coast.
They're always fair, coast to coast. You can be fair, too. When you rise and shine, every morning rise and shine. You can rise and shine every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide when you follow Big C Sports on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C and them good old boys down south. As we always tell you, my mom always said there's never ever an excuse for racism or domestic violence. If you know any man, woman, or child going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and ask for help, because no man, woman, or child should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports Show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.